For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh. Revi on Talking Point today. We're looking at Central Asia, and our expert is traveling all the way from Kyrgyzstan. Is Niva Yau. You've seen her on StratNews Global before. She's a senior fellow with the OSCE Academy in Bishkek. Niva, welcome to a very hot India and welcome to StratNews again in person. We've, of course, met you online before.
Thank you for having me.
Niva, of course, all across the world, the big headlines of the analysis is about what's happening in Ukraine and the Russian invasion. How has that really impacted Central Asia? Are there worries like in countries to the west of Russia of a threat from Putin at some point in the future?
So this is a very interesting question because at the moment, things are still evolving. But we have to keep in mind that there are millions and millions of cheap labor migrant workers from Central Asia that are working in Russia. So we have this worry in Central Asia that is their livelihood at stake? And second point is, are they safe? There are rumors going around that these Central Asian workers are being recruited to the front line so that they can get expedited in getting Russian citizenship. So that's a key concern. And then the second concern is their territorial integrity intact? So if you asked any scholar in the region 3 months ago or even a month ago, this was very unlikely, right? But right now, particularly in Kazakhstan, this is a genuine concern because there's been a lot of hints here and there from people in Russia, scholars, some politicians that have hinted at something about concern for the Russian minority in Kazakhstan, for example.
Wow. So that's worrying. I mean, just to switch again, before I come back to the region, you just testified before the US-China Commission there, and recommendations from that commission go to Congress later in the year, I believe. How receptive were the Americans who listened to yours and a lot of other testimonies in terms of China's footprint and influence there and what needs to be done?
Well, obviously, Central Asia is a very small region. It comprises of 5 countries. The population is quite small. It's about 70 million people in this part of the land. So there's not a lot of businesses. So naturally, it's difficult to pinpoint the importance on the map. I think my experience in Washington is that this thinking has changed because of the war. And because now there's global awareness of Chinese influence and Chinese global strategy, and that has really put Central Asia on the map again.
If you could, for our viewers, give us an overview in terms of history. Now, post the collapse of the Soviet Union, you've seen a lot of Chinese influence come in. Before that, it was probably negligible because of the Soviet Union. If you could put that in perspective, and in what areas and how worrisome is it for the Central Asian countries?
So, it's very interesting to talk about Central Asia being in India because, Central Asia has had, many relations, in the past with India. And I think that's why India has a particular interest in Central Asia. And so is China in a way. Actually, in the Chinese history, many of the Chinese civilizations actually collapsed and rised because of the, management with, Central Asia that, now we call it Central Asia, but back in the day, we called it CU, the Western region. So it's actually, with or without the Soviet Union, with or without, the current state that is Central Asia today, it has always been interested, for the Chinese to study the region. But if we talk about after the Soviet Union, in 1991, when the region first became independent, China had little to no leverage, no contacts, and no knowledge about the region. Because of the Soviet Union, all these ties have been, cut off. It's the same with the story of India and Central Asia. So China started from scratch. They built economic inroads that connected the east coast of China through Xinjiang to Central Asia, through the pipeline, the railway train. And after the logistics is sorted, the trade came. So 90% of China's trade within the region is in oil and gas, but this is diversifying in the past 5 years. This is now in aluminium processing, copper processing, oil refinery upgrades, cotton, agriculture, in many, many sectors.
Uranium as well, I presume.
This was new. Uranium is new. So that's economic, right? But then you have social side. You have language promotion, right? People in Central Asia that are going to China to learn Chinese language. Confucius Institutes that has completely monopolized the study of Chinese language and the study of China itself, right? You have media representation of China, through cooperation agreements, reprinting, so on and so forth. You have military cooperation at the border, the exercises, the trainings, the, 1 to 3 year military education programs. All these things have started to build Chinese influence in Central Asia.
So how much is China's thrust to and through Central Asia economic, and how much is it security related, or they're completely intertwined?
So I'm a firm believer that Chinese economic strategies are used to fulfill political goals, because this is the exact same case within China. Economics is used to fulfill political goals domestically, and I think in foreign policy is also very much the same way. So when we talk about Chinese interests in Central Asia, the most important thing is securing the region that is Xinjiang or East Turkestan as Chinese territory. And Central Asia has helped China do that. And they have decided to help China do that because they see that their future, their political future and their economic future is tied to China, which is why they made this transactional relationship. They will help China secure Xinjiang by deporting Uyghurs and by not letting, Uyghur refugees in their territories. And in exchange, they leverage a lot in the economic relationship, in asking for products to be exported to China, in asking for industrial capacity. It's a transactional relationship.
That transactional relationship, of course, everybody studies different countries and how China has behaved there. Is Central Asia, are all the 5 countries knowledgeable of what China has done in different countries to make them dependent and then fall into a debt trap and then lose your sovereignty and your economic legitimacy, so as to speak?
I think before the port situation in Sri Lanka, there was very little concern. But after that, and especially right now, because of the new situation in Sri Lanka, this has revived, attention of Central Asians towards the debts. And we have started to see leaders in the business community actually voicing out and being concerned about the debts. And they're actually trying to find ways to deal with it, especially in terms of signing on new projects. Whereas, 5-6 years ago, when they signed on a highway or, electricity transmission line, they wouldn't even talk about repayment plans. But now they do. Now there are people asking, and now they have to justify why they're taking this loan, especially because of Sri Lanka, also because of, other parts of the world as well.
And how do you analyze the Russia-China dynamic? I mean, they call themselves unlimited partners at the moment, but to a certain extent, they're competing in Central Asia. And now with Ukraine, it is believed that Russia will become weaker. How do you see that dynamic developing?
I think China and Russia has always been, interesting partners. I think their relationship, changes at different times. And I think the context of the relationship is also the context of the global developments. I think right now, China is not trying to be too distant because then it will upset Russia, but it also doesn't want to be too close to Russia because then it will upset all the other partners and it will, intensify the tension that already exists in the, dividing global worldview. So I think China is trying to make sure that it stays as neutral and it stays as, unpredictable and, unclear as possible so that it could go either way. By the time this finishes, that's when it will decide. That's usually how, Chinese foreign policy goes. It doesn't pick side immediately. It tries to see how things are going. And then once it sees that who's the winner, then it will go after that person.
And how do you expect Russia to react? Because if you say, I saw your testimony in Washington where you talk about history and how Central Asia has always, China, the Communist Party has always seen it as a periphery and how that always impacted domestic politics. But then Central Asia was always part of the Soviet Union, which is now, possibly even looking at the Russian Empire. Uh, how do you think Russia would react to China's inroads in Central Asia?
I think we talk a lot about these big players, right? Like Russia, China, in Central Asia. But I think what has really changed in the past couple of years is that Central Asian leaders and Central Asian public actually they voice out their views on foreign policy a lot, and they actually have a very solid understanding of their place in the world, in having this multi-vector policy, in having welcoming different actors like India, South Korea, Turkey, Iran. They actually do not want this continuous tension between Russia, China, and US to actually play out in Central Asia. So looking at it from that perspective, Central Asian states do what they can in their capacity, in their limitations, to try to, build up their own states. And that is, a genuine Central Asian state that is not a product of the Soviet Union, that is not influenced by China. I think this is a trend that is very nice to see. And this is a trend that will definitely impact, the relationship between Russia and China in the region, because they will not be able to push for so many initiatives anymore, because the pushback is not coming from each other. The pushback is not coming from the US or other actors, but the pushback is coming from locally.
So in that light, Niva, when you look at, say, India re-engaging with Central Asia, and Central Asia looking at various players, like you said, Iran, Korea, Japan, how does Central Asia view India's re-engagement there? We've had the first summit, not the first summit, but the online summit, which has taken place. The NSAs have met as well. How does Central Asia view India as a player so that they can balance this great power rivalry?
I think in finding partners to work with, Central Asian states at the moment have quite a number of things that clearly they want. And the number one thing is, and that's the number one thing that I gave as a recommendation to the US Congress, is that Central Asian states want to be integrated to the world system. We are talking about countries like Kazakhstan that only joined the World Trade Organization in 2016. We are talking about Uzbekistan that has a huge economy, that has loads of potential, that is still in the process of getting into the World Trade Organization. So the first thing for India is India has so much experience in its own integration with the world system that it can share with countries like Central Asia. In terms of logistics, India, in partnership with Iran, can actually help Central Asian states to be integrated with the existing global trade system. I think these are some of the things that are important to start with, and these are some of the things that are already, of much interest in Central Asia. And apart from that, we're talking about, okay, what current policy in India, what are the things that are, in the process of, being after? And the key thing is right now, energy security. Am I right? And if we think about energy security, where is India getting gas? That's Turkmenistan. And I can tell you that leadership in Turkmenistan right now, they are worried about the US-China tension. And they are worried that they might not be able to sell gas to China anymore. It's actually become very urgent that they need to build an alternative pipeline. And they're in negotiation with Europe. They're in negotiation with India on TAPI. So it's in their interest that they are doing this. And it's also in Indian interest. How about the nuclear fuel? India wants to triple nuclear capacity in the next 10 years, right? How are you going to do that? Where are you going to buy your uranium? How about Kazakhstan? Kazakhstan has the world's largest uranium reserves. But then, okay, you want to buy uranium raw material from Kazakhstan. How are you going to transport that? So that's why logistics is important. I think a lot of people like to say that logistics is difficult. And yes, it is difficult. But we have to keep in mind that China also built this 30, 20 years ago. And something that you do today, you create the fruits of tomorrow, 5, 10 years down the line. And I think it's important. And I think Central Asia for India, bound by a geographical location, that has a lot of potential. But the work in logistics needs to start today, and the projects and the business opportunities will come later down the line.
But how do people, I know I keep saying Central Asia, but there are 5 different countries here and such, there would be varied opinions. But how is India viewed there in terms of, say, this great power rivalry that's happening everywhere, including in Central Asia, in terms of maybe not being, like the Chinese coming in to grab anything? We would look at the needs of the people, possibly. How is India viewed there?
So India and Central Asia currently, at least since the 90s, has nothing, has no negative sentiments. So the negative sentiments of China is associated with corruption, is associated with Chinese workers coming in taking jobs, environmental pollution, so on and so forth. Many things. There's a list of things. But for India, it's a new actor. The visibility is low, and it's been low in the past 20 years. But that's good in a sense because you start as a clean slate. You get to build all these cultural ties. There was a very impressive opera that was on a show in Ashgabat when Modi went to Ashgabat. I think that was very eye-opening actually for Central Asians. That was very nice to see, and I think that sort of thing has a lot of potential to be expanded in cultural ties and in education of the history of the Silk Road, history of the two regions. I think there's a lot of empowerment that Central Asia can enjoy from the historians from India.
You talked about uranium, and I do think there is some kind of arrangement or agreement between India and Kazakhstan. Connectivity you mentioned, and Iran, again, Chabahar, and there's a trilateral with Uzbekistan. Afghanistan is key here, right? And again, I go back to your testimony in Washington, and I presume your other work, which you are recommending that Afghanistan, or not Afghanistan, but the Taliban regime, which is in control of Afghanistan, should not be isolated. If you could explain that.
I know this is a sensitive subject because I think there's a lot of history between Taliban and Pakistan and India, and I understand that. But moving forward, it will be difficult for the region to completely isolate Afghanistan because this is your neighbors. This is in your neighborhood, and regardless of history, I think there's space to interact. There's space for exchange to the point where you start to be able to work on some small things and then you build it up. I think a complete isolation is not good on both sides because clearly the Taliban leadership are reaching out. And clearly there are some actors in the region like the Uzbek government that actually want to work with the Taliban in some certain areas like logistics. And I think these are things that put negotiations on the table. These are developments that are positive in the sense that it's not the most controversial issue. We're not talking about refugees, we're just talking about trade. And I think these are the issues we can start with so that we can talk about other things further down the line.
And when you go back to say it, a TAPI cannot happen unless there is engagement with the Taliban or whoever's in power in Afghanistan, right?
Of course, and we can see that actually. The Taliban has been having meetings with Uzbekistan, with Turkmenistan. It is trying to convince the Central Asian leaders that the pipeline is possible and we want it and we will secure it. Whether or not the Central Asian leaders are convinced, I think they need to go to the ground to see it. I think at the moment there is a Taliban diplomat in Ashgabat now, so that's a very good you maintain a stable line of communication. But I think what's more important is actually for Central Asians to go to Afghanistan and see for themselves.
Niva Yau, absolute pleasure talking to you in person, much better than I think online. And we hope to welcome you back to India in cooler times next time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks
It's
again,
great.
Niva. And to all our viewers, thanks for engaging with this video. Do put up your comments and suggestions. Do also follow our social media handles. And if you'd like to support us financially, there are two ways to do that. And we'll put up a UPI ID. Or else, as soon as the stream ends, YouTube has started a new feature called Super Thanks. That will be a heart-shaped icon just next to the thumbs up that I hope you've given this video. You can choose the amount that you want to support us with. This is Talking Point on StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi.